1776 was a year of momentous events, not just in retrospect, but in the eyes of those who lived through them. To Americans, the date speaks for itself. In January, Thomas Paine's stirring call to arms, Common Sense, followed at the end of the year by the American crisis, These are the times that try men's souls. In March, the British driven out of Boston by Washington's army of raw recruits, and, to immortal effect, the new nation's Declaration of Independence on July 4th. Nor were the year's significant events limited to the Revolution, or even to the 13 small colonies hugging the continent's eastern shore. 3,000 miles away, in what is now California, a new structure arose on a bay of the Pacific Ocean. It became San Francisco's Presidio. Across the Atlantic, in Britain's lively world of ideas and letters, 1776 likewise saw a series of memorable events. In February, Edward Gibbon, a member of Parliament, published the first volume of his monumental The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. The work eventually ran to 6 volumes, and it remains today one of the most familiar histories in the English language, a saucy account of ancient Rome's descent into decadence and corruption that many of Gibbon's readers took to be a commentary on Britain in their own day. In August, following a long illness, David Hume died at home in Edinburgh. Hume's contemporaries regarded him as the most stellar figure of the Scottish Enlightenment. Their judgment has endured. In the meanwhile, in March, Hume's closest friend and intellectual protege, another Scot, had published a book of his own. Adam Smith was never as prolific as his friend and mentor. At age 52, he had produced only his second book. But The Wealth of Nations would prove one of the most influential works of all time, shaping Western ideas as well as the conduct of everyday life ever since. Its importance was evident almost immediately. By the time Smith died, 14 years later, it had already gone through 5 editions in English, plus translations into German, French, Danish, and Italian. Within another dozen years, editions in Dutch, Spanish, delayed until then by opposition from the Inquisition, Swedish, and Russian had followed. The Wealth of Nations marked a fundamental ground shift in thinking about what underlies economic behavior, what consequences follow from it, and how governments might therefore act to foster the prosperity of their peoples and the vitality of their nations. Like a very few before him, Smith understood that private initiative, undertaken for no reason other than to advance a person's own economic interest, can nonetheless end up making other people better off too. His crucial insight was that the setting in which such beneficial consequences would follow was the market economy, and that the mechanism that delivered this outcome was competition. In time, following the publication of Smith's pivotal contribution, centuries of top-down direction of economic activity gave way to more individually propelled, competitive enterprise. Where it did not, the Soviet Union, for example, or Maoist China, those in power either altered course or were swept away. The few remaining holdouts, like Cuba and North Korea, stand as symbols of human tragedies that did not have to be. But where did Smith's ideas, and those of his immediate predecessors on which he drew, come from? Why did this all-important transition in thinking about such a central aspect of human activity take place mostly over the course of the 18th century, rather than 100 years before or after? What change in the intellectual soil, or in the broader currents shaping the creative air that they breathed and through which they talked to one another, prompted Hume and Smith and many of their contemporaries to think in this new, so powerfully influential direction? One element of the story, widely understood and well documented, was Newtonian science, with its emphasis on systematic laws of physical behavior and the mechanisms that stand behind them. A large part of David Hume's agenda, and Adam Smith's as well, was to construct a science of man comparable to what Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, and other great scientists not so long before had achieved for the physical world. By Hume's and Smith's time, Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, first published in 1687, had become part of the common intellectual property of educated men in both England and Scotland. Its influence was pervasive. By contrast, in his treatise of human nature, written when Smith was still an undergraduate, Hume observed that studies of human behavior remained in the same condition as astronomy found itself before the time of Copernicus.